All right, let's talk about anti-intellectualism on the left. It takes a different form, but it is the same fucking end. If you don't know me, I study the far right, and I think a lot about anti-intellectualism on the right, but I have been seeing so much anti-intellectualism from leftists specifically in my comment section that I need to address. These are things like reverse ethnocentrism. These are things like black and white dogmatic thinking. And these are things like resisting expertise in favor of highly simplistic and inaccurate versions of situations in history that make you feel like you don't have to take action because nothing can ever improve. Okay, so the argument goes like this. Fascism is anything you don't personally like, and if someone like me, an academic, is trying to differentiate and educate about the kinds of bad that show up in political systems and degrees of bad and how they impact people, then I am dismissing the experiences of marginalized groups who have always had it bad in exactly the same way throughout the history of our country, and that the only difference now is that it's happening to white people. And then there's always some virtue signaling about how much you care about Palestine. Always, always, always. So this argument that it's always been bad in exactly the same way, I think gives people a lot of false hope, which is why it's so attractive. Because if things have always been bad and the only people now suffering are middle-class white people, then you don't have to recognize they're getting exponentially worse. Have you asked an immigrant if it's worse now for them than it was before? It will not be primarily middle-class white people who experience oppression now that will get worse. It will be these marginalized groups who are already suffering. And B, shouldn't we fucking care about middle-class white people also? This is like such a black and white carceral mindset to me. You are acting as though everyone should suffer if anyone suffers, as opposed to like, let's bring everyone out. Let's liberate everyone so that they can have a good and dignified life. These kind of people also like to go after academia entirely as an institution, saying that because there are problems with it, therefore it's incurably flawed and should be done away with. And this is throwing the baby out with the bathwater and presenting a simple solution to a complex problem. I've also heard people say that we don't need academia because we have TikTok and YouTube, and just the amount that this is crazy. The amount of depth that I can get into on TikTok is this big compared to what I can do, an hour and a half twice a week for 4 months. But there's no value in that level of depth, right? Everything can be reduced to a soundbite. Why do we need to explain the difference between neoliberalism and fascism if it's all just bad? Another thing that's happening here is sort of reverse ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is this fallacy where people think that their culture and their country and their way of life is the best and the most supreme, right? And we all do this to a certain extent. But on the left, it's a reactionary, America's the worst country on the planet. Nobody's ever been worse than this country. It shows me that you are deeply uncurious about the history of the world and any other country. Tell me without telling me that you've never heard of France, Spain, or Great Britain. We've been living in a multicultural democracy, a flawed one, but still it existed for the last 40 years. And we are returning to earlier iterations where democracy was much reduced to the population. But if you say this is as bad, it's always been this bad, and all these groups have always suffered in the same way, then you don't see the nuances in our history and how things have been better, and they're getting worse now, but it doesn't mean that they can't improve through efforts like a renewed civil rights movement, okay? And that just allows you to sit back and just be a critic without actually building anything. This masquerades as critique when reality it's just anti-intellectualism, it's just reactivity, it's just as dogmatic as what's happening on the right. It's fucking dangerous, and if you are serious about wanting things to change, you need to understand them. You cannot fix a problem until you understand the problem. So yes, neoliberalism is not fascism. It is quite bad for a lot of people, and I'm not okay with what Joe Biden did with Palestine either, man. But let's get real about solving the problems, okay? And anti-intellectualism is a problem on the left. We do not have time for this anymore.